Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer's morning briefing. Derby special this week as we look ahead to the big game of the weekend tomorrow. I'm Patrick McPartlin and I'm joined as usual by Liam Bryce. I think before we get into talking about the weekend's game, a few things to look back from this week, such as Lewis Miller's first call up to the Australia squad and the reserve game fixture during the week in which a lot of fringe first teamers got a run out. So, Liam, we'll just look at Lewis Miller first. I think it was trailed earlier on in the week that he was likely to get the first call up to the Socceroos. Deserved on his performances so far this season?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think he's been really good. Sort of building on the sort of promise that he showed at the end of last season, and he's carried that on. I think the effect that Nick Montgomery has had on him is quite obvious. Do you know what I mean? It's the ideal appointment for him, really. I think he's. Like it was last week, he was talking about him. He said he's been like a father figure to him throughout his career. He was the kind of guy who gave him his first, big break in first team football. So, he's obviously relishing the fact that he's come in to now be his manager at Hibs, and you can say that in his performances. He's playing with a lot of confidence. And he's been given a lot of responsibility as well. Hibs, I feel like when, a lot of the play initially will go down that side through him. He sees a lot of the ball, I think potentially more than anybody. I think at least in last week's game, he was heavily involved. He gets up and down. He's a real kind of physical specimen as well. He's still a bit raw in some aspects, I would say. But I mean, this, first involvement in international football, that's, it feels like a natural progression for him. He's done really well, and he seems to sort of feel very at home at Hibs as well. Do you know what I mean? He's, he gives off that impression of being kind of really comfortable in his surroundings. When you listen to him speak. Yeah, I mean, I think I would say it's well deserved for him. And it'll be a real boost for him getting into this week's game as well. So yeah, well done to him.
Yeah, obviously not a player short on confidence on or off the pitch. I think you see some of what he says in press conferences, the way he conducts himself on the pitch, and just getting into those not scraps as such, but I mean he puts himself about a bit on the pitch. I don't think he's one of those players that doesn't really take any nonsense from opposing players, which I suppose is what you need going into a derby, and especially going into a derby where you've got he's got countrymen on the other team. I know obviously Nathaniel Atkinson's missing out, which is probably part of the reason why he's been given his chance with the international team. But Cammy Devlin, Kai Rolls, I think two players who are likely to start. There's going to be that extra bit of needle, isn't there?
Yeah, there's definitely a strong Australian flavour to the Edinburgh derby these days. And like you say about Miller, he is that kind of character. People say that all the time, and it's one of the kind of football's great intangibles. But just to have guys on the pitch in these games who are just kind of are up for the fight, to use a bit of a cliche, but it's true at the same time. You do need a certain element of that, and it's good for this Hibs team to have a bit of edge like that as well. Do you know what I mean? It's been a lot of good football played. You can tell the direction that Nick Montgomery wants to take the team, but I think all good teams do have those kind of players. I'm not saying he's a hatchet man or anything like that, but he's combative. He's as you say, he's confident. He doesn't back down. He's kind of physically strong, and obviously he seems to have a real kind of mental strength about him as well in terms of his confidence. As you say, just how he conducts himself. He comes across really well in press conferences, post-match interviews, and whatnot. But there could be a wee bit of needle. Obviously, a few of these guys a lot of them will be very familiar with each other by now. I think there'll always be that kind of extra competitiveness when you do have. It's a strange thing, a fixture with a lot of guys who are involved in the same national team circles, and then obviously they'll be going off on the international break straight after this. So there'll be whoever doesn't come out on top. There'll be no time to let it kind of fade into the background. They'll be reminded of it until the moment they step back in Edinburgh, and they'll be reminded of it from the moment they step back in Edinburgh as well. So it just kind of demonstrates, there's so many kind of wee subplots is the word I was looking for there when you come into games like this. But you're right, just not to stray too far from Lewis Miller. We'll get on to the derby later on. But yeah, it seems like he'll be right up for this tomorrow, and I'd imagine the rest of them will be as well.
Yeah, and you should point out as well, Nick Montgomery, from his time spent in the A-League as a player and as a manager with Central Coast, he'll know a lot about these players. He'll have tracked them. He said that himself. He's sort of kept an eye on players from the A-League who've come over to Europe, which is, I think, only natural, but as well for a manager like Montgomery, who, he's immersing himself in every single aspect of the club. He was at the women's game at the weekend when they beat Aberdeen in the Cup. He's gone to the, he's obviously at the reserve games. He's at the under-18s games, which is how he, saw Rory Whittaker and decided to give him a chance. So I think going into a game of such magnitude for both sets of fans, it's good to have a manager who is, kind of just immersing himself in all aspects of the club. But I think, obviously Hibs without a win at Tynecastle since 2019, Boxing Day, Martin Boyle's double. You talk there about characters with the likes of Lewis Miller, and then, there's other players in that Hibs squad who I think are quite big personalities on and off the pitch. And my personal feeling is that that's something that Hibs have maybe been missing in the past, is having, we talk a lot about players getting the Edinburgh derby, but I think a lot of the time it's more just having players with that sort of character who, know what it means to sort of go onto a pitch for 90 plus minutes and, fight for every ball, chase every lost cause. And I suppose really, kind of put in a bit more than you would to like a normal kind of run-of-the-mill football match. But it feels like even players who might not previously have been like that, having somebody like Montgomery in place and his coaching staff with Sergio Raimundo as well, that they should be able to bring out a bit more from these players for such an important game.
Yeah, I think so. You touch on it there. There is that, the phrase that gets bandied about as, people getting the club or getting the derby. But I think at the end of the day, I think it is just a certain type of, mentality. It's a certain type of personality, a certain type of person. I think, the fact there that you say Hibs haven't won at Tynecastle since 2019, and then I think that kind of is indicative again of what you say, that the Hibs have maybe lacked these certain characters and these personalities, people with a real strong mindset to go into the, which is obviously the most hostile environment in football for a Hibs player, and the fact that they haven't won for that length of time does perhaps speak to that it's something that the team's been lacking. So I think if they were to come away with a positive result and performance tomorrow, you might be able to, I think we could start backing that up. These assertions that it feels like Hibs have got a bit more about them in terms of that. But obviously, it's all right saying it, but I think obviously the real proof of it will be what happens on the pitch tomorrow. But I think certainly, without the game having unfolded yet, I do get that same feeling that you're alluding to there, that there is sort of bigger personalities across the board, guys who won't sort of back down from these challenges. But again, as I say, the only the proof of it will be come 3 p.m. on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think potentially something to add to the mix is just the way that the last derby it was the last derby full stop, but the last derby at Tynecastle, the way things unfolded after the final whistle. I've written about this in the past couple of weeks, that it's almost the game, I think itself, is almost forgotten just because of everything that went on at full time, sort of both sets of players, coaching staff, backroom staff involved in that kind of mass brawl on the pitch. But I suppose, fans of both clubs would have been looking at the fixtures when they came out in the summer to see, when's the first derby going to be, just to kind of really, reignite what is already quite a bad-tempered game at times, but with like an extra layer. But I suppose the departure of Lee Johnson makes that a little bit. It changes it somewhat. It's maybe, there might still be that same sort of needle. There'll be that same sort of needle anyway. But I think with Lee Johnson having left, there's not, the number one perpetrator, if you like, is no longer here. And it's maybe that, could that be good for Hibs? Like maybe not having that sort of hanging over them. That it is, as Montgomery has said with his players, it's a fresh start. Going into this.
I don't know. I mean, yeah. I mean, as you say, the main character from that episode has moved on. But I don't know. Just in terms of whether it's, I think it depends. They could use that. The fact that there was a bad tempered end to this game. Obviously, it's a new management team. There are some new players that have come in, but a lot of these guys will have been there that day. And I think you don't. It will always be played down post match, like when people speak about it. But I think, like, internally, I don't think it matters what level of football you play at. If the last time that you played a team, there was a bit of aggro, a bit of needle, as you say, it doesn't really get forgotten about. It will be brought up, I'd imagine, at some point through the week. And again, it's just one other thing that is, we were talking about subplots earlier on. It adds another layer to that. I'm not saying anybody's going to be stepping on the pitch looking for a fight, but it's.
Have you been to a derby before, Liam?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I could be miles off with that. I mean, from the outset, there might be a wee bit of football played first. What happens after that is anybody's guess. But no, it'll still be in people's minds. You don't. It wasn't exactly World War III, but it was enough to, for people to remember. Fans certainly won't have forgotten about it. That's for sure. And it's I think it's part and parcel of football, and you kind of the commentators. That you always get a commentator saying, these are the scenes that we don't want to see at football games, when everybody's kind of secretly thinking, this is what you want from a derby, isn't it? You want a wee bit of drama at least. But it's another wee subplot, and the fact that there has been a bit of needle between these two teams before, and you wonder again if it's going to play out that way. Sometimes it only takes 1 week and a spark to light it. But I think in the main, it'll be two teams focused on their football and game plan. Obviously, we might come on to that a wee bit later on, but it'll be fascinating to see how they match up. Obviously, Hibs with a new manager coming in with a completely new system against Stephen A. Smith, Hearts manager, who's you feel he's still sort of feeling out what exactly his best setup and his best starting 11 is. You've kind of seen it chop and change a wee bit of late.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think obviously that'll be the primary focus in the two dressing rooms. But there is always a wee edge to these games, and you never want to lose that, really, do you?
No, of course not. You mentioned team selection there, albeit for Hearts, but I think it's an interesting prospect for Hibs and how Nick Montgomery lines up for this game. I mean, I suppose this question's kind of twofold. I suppose one is, do you see him deviating at all from what he's done so far in terms of his system, in terms of that sort of 4-4-2 with the fluid front four, and team selection as well? The team has largely picked itself for most of the positions. Most of the personalities have picked themselves in the last few weeks. But you look at the midweek game there in the reserve league, Hibs coming out on top against Queen's Park. Few fringe first teamers, getting a run out there. Likes of Josh Campbell's playing, Dylan Levitt getting minutes, Riley Harbottle playing as well. Do you see any selection sort of surprises for this game? I suppose maybe one of the big questions is, do you go for Rocky Bashiri or Paul Hanlon at the back? But do you see any surprises at Tynecastle tomorrow?
Not huge surprises, to be honest with you. Again, you never know before these games. Sometimes managers do like to pull something completely out of left field. But as far as the guys who played in that bounce game during the week there, I don't doubt that they'll have a part to play over the season, but I'm not sure that any of them are currently banging on the door to replace anybody who's been playing regularly. You talk about, you've got Dylan Levitt and Josh Campbell. I think Newell and Jago it's quite well established that they are the preferred two in the middle of the park. Barring any injuries or anything that's happened through the week, I'd be amazed if it wasn't the two of them starting in the middle of the park. He touched on the centre back area. Hanlon came back in last week, but Rocky Bashiri played the majority of the games before that under Montgomery. But I do feel, just for certain reasons, I feel like Paul Hanlon will play tomorrow. I've just put my neck right on the line there.
No,
I try to avoid doing that as much as possible.
There's people watching this live, bookmarking this right now.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I feel like it makes sense in terms of, he's still the club captain. So from that point of view, there will be guys in there, experiencing, who don't have as much experience at this fixture as he does. And I even think, from a tactical point of view, I think if Hibs are, I do expect them to still stick with trying to build from the back and playing out. And I'd imagine, the onus would be on Hearts to be sort of aggressive. There have been a couple of teams who have been happy to, let Hibs play out and just sit off back in their shape. I'm not sure Hearts will do that. I think they'd be a bit more aggressive. So I think if you are looking to build from the back, then I think Hanlon is possibly a better option in that sense than Rocky Bashiri, just in terms of being able to play quickly under pressure. I've kind of touched on it before that I don't think Bashiri's completely comfortable in possession, just on that side where he's forced to come onto his left foot a lot more often. Whereas that's a bit more natural for Paul Hanlon. I do think he's probably a better sort of progressive passer of the ball. Where else in the team? I don't know. I don't want to hog all these predictions.
No, this is good.
I'm obviously such a fan. I'm making bold calls. I'm picking the team for Montgomery here.
I think the other sort of main sort of selection poser, if you like, would be who you're going for up front. Would you go for Christian Doidge? Do you go for Adam Le Fondre? I think there's arguments for starting either. I think there's also arguments for having either coming off the bench. Personally, I'm a big fan of Adam Le Fondre. I'm a big fan of the way he sort of links play. I'm a big fan of those sort of little touches he has. You look at the pass for Dylan Benta's goal against St Johnstone, for instance. That sort of experience, that sort of footballing nous that you get when you've been playing at quite a high level for as long as he has. But I just wonder whether having somebody like him to come off the bench for the last 20, 25 minutes, again, we've talked about putting our necks on the line here, but somebody you could argue could be a potential match winner. You consider what derbies are like, whether it's played at Hampden, whether it's played at Easter Road, whether it's Tynecastle. Sometimes all you need is just somebody in the 6-yard box in the 88th minute to sort of get a toe on a ball, put it in the net. Christian Doidge obviously is that sort of player. I think we've seen certainly a couple of seasons back where he was scoring all manner of goals, and it just seemed that if he was in the area, the ball would hit off him and go in. I think he alluded to that himself. Balls going in off his shoulder, off his shin, off his knee. But Le Fondre's kind of got that aura about him as well, if you like. He's played in so many derbies, and we played them in Australia, played them in England. He'll know what's expected. But if you're making another bold call, you've already made a couple today, so you can make another one. Who are you opting for to partner Venta up front?
I don't know. Genuinely, I'm not.
Brilliant.
This isn't just a deliberately sitting on the fence so that I don't have to make a decision. Yeah. I have given this one plenty of thought, and obviously we have the analysis, the pre-match analysis piece that we've got up on the website. You will see that I didn't make an outright call on that, because I do feel there's an argument for both.
It's tough.
Yeah. I think so. Le Fondre, again, vastly experienced, a calm head, the kind of personality you would look to on these, occasions where the ball can be a bit of a hot potato. Just somebody to bring a bit of calmness, a bit of nous to it, and as well, just from a tactical point of view as well, you'd expect maybe Hearts to play three in the middle, which could potentially give them obviously a numerical advantage over Newell and Jago, and then are you looking to have somebody who can drop in and just be more comfortable in those areas, help to link the play, because it's obviously going to be so important. If Hearts are maybe going to try and press Hibs a bit higher, can they play through that? You need somebody in there to link the midfield and the attack, and obviously I think Le Fondre gives you that more than Doidge would. He's more than an out-and-out striker. Whereas Le Fondre has maybe got, in terms of playing in deeper areas, he's probably a bit more comfortable doing that. But again, there's an argument for Christian Doidge as well. I think sometimes in these games it is, if you are under the cosh a wee bit in terms of trying to get out, it's it's always useful to have somebody who you can go a bit more direct to. I'm not, saying like, that they're going to just resort to launching the ball, but he is the type of guy who will hold the ball in for you. Doidge makes good runs. He works so hard as well, and I think just in terms of you look at the Hearts backline, I think in terms of like a physical presence, I think the likes of Kai Rolls in that sense, he can be unsettled a wee bit. Kind of watched Hearts against when they get beat by St Mirren a few weeks ago, and up front for St Mirren you had Olasanya, who just didn't do, I think he was seemed like outstanding in the game, but I think his presence and his sheer work rate, it did leave kind of Rose in the Hearts backline kind of unsettled in that sense. So I think you can kind of make them uncomfortable in that way, and that could potentially bring Doidge into the thinking. But I think just for the length of time we've spent talking about it, I think it is the kind of the sort of most up in the air decision. I would think anyway. If you're picking a team tomorrow, I think most of the rest of it largely picks itself. I would say sort of 3 out of the back 4. It's obviously left back. Does Lewis Stevenson stay in, or does Jordan Abita come back in? Midfield 2, Newell, Jago, and you'd imagine 3 of the front 4 will be Yuan, Venta, and Boyle. So I think that will be a key decision for Nick Montgomery. I'm sure he'll be asked about it in his press conference today, and I'm sure he'll not give any sort of answer because it's not the kind of thing you give away the day before a derby. So I think we're just going to have to wait until the back at 1 o'clock tomorrow for when the team sheets appear.
Yeah, and I think also, we talk about selection choices that he has to make. It's a nice dilemma to have, because I think you look at Hibs teams previously with the amount of injuries they had, or players, obviously it was that 6 months period where they didn't have Martin Boyle to call on either. But it's I think it's probably a nice dilemma, a sort of nice headache for Nick Montgomery to have, that he can call on these players and sort of say, right, you're starting today, and he can get a shift from them for 65, 70, 75, 90 minutes. And as he's spoken about before, he's got strong options off the bench as well, which, as we've seen from previous derbies, can be such a sort of boost, just to have somebody to come off the bench and change things. I think certainly the last derby at Tynecastle, the last derby full stop, didn't really have that for Hibs. There were options on the pitch certainly, but on the bench there wasn't really, looking for a game changer. I don't think there was anyone really obvious that stuck out. I think maybe the one other thing to look at is whether or not Hibs' style of play under Nick Montgomery will be affected by the Tynecastle pitch. It's maybe a little bit tighter than what they're used to. Do you think that'll be? It's not going to cause them problems, but you think that'll see maybe a couple of adjustments?
I think it can be a factor. It's not. I don't think they're going to change completely the way they want to play because of it. But a tight pitch, guys bearing down on top of you, it does make a difference in terms of how quickly you have to play, how accurate you have to be in your passing, how composed you have to be when receiving the ball, making the good decisions when there's sort of chaos unfolding all around you. So I mean, it potentially it can make things more difficult. But I think it's I wouldn't expect any kind of wholesale change in approach. You might find, as just tends to happen in these games, sometimes teams are forced to end up going a wee bit more direct because the opposition are constantly on top of you. It's the way these games unfold at times. It's not always any derby game at any level. Not always one for the purists, and it's again, I'm wheeling out another old cliche, but I think you have to earn the right to play first. You have to win individual battles. So at the pitch, it's definitely a factor. And it's like at Tynecastle as well. The fans are right down on top of you, and again, it takes a certain type of personality to be able to deal with that. But again, you were touching on there, like it's nice for Montgomery to have options in his team selection as well, and it's again, I think especially in fixtures like this, it's so important to be able to have a degree of flexibility, because as I've said there, they are so often so nip and tuck, and so there's very, very little in it, and sometimes it can come down to which manager manages in game the best, which one makes the best decisions, the best subs. So, obviously having the majority of your first team players available increases your your chances of being able to do that. So it is so important. But as we've kind of as we've touched on, there's just so many different factors at play in these fixtures, and it just makes it fascinating, really.
It does. And I'm sure we'll find out more from Nick Montgomery at his press conference this afternoon. You can, of course, read the latest from Easter Road, manager's thoughts, and those of whichever player is put up for press on hibsobserver.co.uk from, I think, around about 10:30 this evening. And yeah, then the big game tomorrow. We'll be there. We'll be providing all the latest updates, team news, comment, you name it. It should be a fantastic fixture. Hopefully, not a 0-0 as we've experienced in the past. And yeah, thank you for joining us, and we will see you again soon. Thank you.
Cheers.